there's a lot you can take away from the first week of football in the NFL. Look, we got answers to unclear situations, and some players even had sneaky good usage. And because of all this, you have to move guys up your rankings, whether it's for now, week 2, or the rest of the season. So here are 12 players who are skyrocketing up the rankings before week 2. And let's begin with Kendrick Bourne, who in my initial projections and rankings for week 2 is a top 20 wide receiver. Yes, top 20. According to Fantasy Life, our official data partner, Kendrick Bourne led the Patriots by running a route on 93% of their dropbacks, which is elite, and he was by far the #1 receiver for Mac Jones. And that is evident right here if you look at the targets column. He earned 11 targets, nobody else was above 7 out of these wide receivers, and he had a massive 54 routes. You can see the other guys with 27 routes. Kayshon Boutte was second with 43 routes. And with all of this usage that he had, he flashed some cheat code upside. Now, the fantasy cheat codes, as a reminder for wide receivers, are your downfield and red zone usage. Bourne ranked 7th in downfield usage and had 2 red zone targets week 1. And now the Patriots surprisingly threw a lot. They threw at the second highest rate week 1. Now they were trailing, so that's obvious, but when the game was close in neutral situations, they were still a top 5 team in pass rate. Pretty simply put, Mac Jones looked really good in this new Bill O'Brien-led offense. Now, it is true that Devontae Parker missed this game. He was projecting to be the wide receiver 1 before the season, but he's not going to take away from Kendrick Bourne's role. No, he's going to take away from some of the other guys, the rookies who saw usage. Specifically, he will take snaps and routes away from Kayshon Boutte, the 6th-round rookie, and Demario Douglas, who had a great preseason. And also make a note here, Juju Smith-Schuster, reports came out that his knee was messed up right before the season started, and this is going to be a chronic issue. He only played 27 snaps, about 50% of the snaps in this game. So Kendrick Bourne is somebody that can't be on your waiver wires. He's literally a top 20 wide receiver for this week, and this next guy is now a stud. And that'll be the Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman, who, yeah, after week 1, he is a stud because he scored the 7th most fantasy points week 1. You can see right here, 19.7. He was right up there with some other guys who were getting a lot of praise after this week, like, you know, the typical guys, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, and yeah, Calvin Ridley. And he did this on the 15th best wide receiver usage of the week. I mean, he was drafted as like the wide receiver 30, so he's already exceeding those expectations. And this production is likely to continue because the Colts were passing a lot. They passed at the 8th highest rate overall, 68% of the time, but when the game was close, a 1-score game or tied, they were throwing at a top 7 rate. And now this is much higher than the preseason expectation when they had a mobile quarterback in Anthony Richardson. You would think, oh, maybe they're going to run the ball a lot. But the truth is, this isn't shocking because their new head coach, Shane Steichen, the former coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, he did the same thing with Jalen Hurts. A mobile quarterback, yeah, he made them throw at a top 5 rate. So this is incredible news for Pittman. In week 1, his role was elite. He played 46 routes, or he ran 46 routes. That's 98% of the Colts passing plays, and it led to overall great volume. Now, depending on where you look, there's different sources because there's different tracking. It was either 11 targets or 9 targets. But the most important part, according to Fantasy Life, for Pittman, if we zoom in right here, his catchable targets, so how accurate his targets were, 89% of them were catchable. I mean, that would rank like top 5 amongst wide receivers last year, and it's very impressive because Anthony Richardson was not an accurate quarterback in college, but the offense built around him says a lot about his coach, Shane Steichen. It is built for him to succeed. Now, Pittman's targets were highly valuable. He had 2 red zone targets, 3 targets off of play action, and he was targeted 4 times on 3rd or 4th down. All of this just means that he was by far the priority in the passing game. If this usage keeps up, Pittman will definitely finish as a top 20 wide receiver with top 10 upside. He has to move up the ranks. And another player moving up the ranks for me is Jayden Reed, the Packers' 2nd-round rookie, who looked solid, if not really good, in his NFL debut. To be honest, if you watch the tape, he looked like a first-round talent. Honestly, he looked like a veteran receiver. Now, he only put up 2 catches for 48 yards. He also had a rush attempt, but the overall underlying usage is what I'm more concerned about. And for that, we head over to the Fantasy Life data where you can see Jayden Reed was tied with Romeo Doubs running the most routes on this team. 67% of the passing plays. He got pulled in the 4th quarter because he got a little bit nicked up as well, so this is probably closer to like 80 or 90%. And then 25% targets per route run. So he was earning a target on 25% of his routes, also tied with Romeo Doubs for the lead. He was basically operating as the wide receiver 1A, 1B in this game. Now, of course, Christian Watson didn't play in this game, and we don't necessarily know when he'll be back. He might miss a couple of more weeks, but it's pretty clear that Jayden Reed will be involved in the offense. And as I mentioned, Reed did leave for a little bit. They called it cramps, but he took a massive hit on a deep target downfield, so I think that's more so what it was, but he came in and actually recovered an onside kick later in the game, so he seems to be good to go. And speaking of that deep target that he got hurt on, Reed led the Packers with an impressive 92 air yards week 1. Now, the biggest concern for Jayden Reed is this. The Packers actually threw 50-50. They threw 50% of the time, ran 50% of the time. Around league league average, but when the game was close, one score or tied, they ranked 3rd worst in the NFL at passing. Now, of course, that's just on a week 1 sample, but this is what the team wants to do. They want to run the ball and not make Jordan Love throw 30 plus times. So if they're not throwing it a lot, that is a concern for like your wide receiver 2 or 3 in the offense. But based on his week 1 role, he has to move up the rankings, and he has the talent and potential efficiency to get by even on lesser volume. Now, this next running back saw a lot of volume and it was encouraging. And if you're finding this video helpful, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can see all my future content that I have coming out for you. And that running back's name is James Cook. And yes, he is indeed the primary running back for the Buffalo Bills. Cook played 61% of the snaps in this game out of the running backs. He saw 67% of the rush attempts and ran 50% of the running back routes. All of this is RB1 usage with a slam dunk for James Cook. And now what did all those percentages work themselves out to? Well, it was 12 rush attempts and 6 targets. So 18 opportunities, top 10 running back usage week 1. And the other running backs on this team between Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, their rush attempts and targets only combined for 7. So here's what this means. James Cook commanded 72% of the running back opportunities week 1, which would rank top 10 last season. And he was targeted on 24% of his routes. Only Stephon Diggs on this team had a higher rate. Amongst running backs last year, that would also rank top 10. Now, there was one key interesting part of the data from the 2-minute snaps on Fantasy Life. You can see right here, this 100% is actually Latavius Murray. All 8 2-minute offense snaps in the 4th quarter, you saw Latavius Murray out there. It's likely because he's the veteran. They trust him more in pass protection late in the game when the game was on the line. Now, this is something to note for sure, but it's not too alarming. James Cook can still earn this usage moving forward. And the good news here is that Latavius Murray is his primary backup. Latavius Murray is 33 and a half years old. Damian Harris only had 1 rush attempt week 1, so he really doesn't have much competition. Now, his week 1 matchup was tough. I mean, he ended up going out there and facing the Jets, who were the number 3 overall defense after it was all said and done week 1. And on 16 total touches between his rush attempts and receptions, he put up 63 total yards. So that's only like 4 yards per touch, not the typical efficiency and explosiveness we were used to seeing out of James Cook, when last year he was 3rd in the NFL, averaging over 6 yards per touch. But now heading into week 2, this should all change because he's coming in as an 8.5 point or 9 point favorite. Even a 10 point favorite is what this opened at for this week. And running backs with similar usage to what Cook saw week 1 in similar matchups as big favorites average 14 fantasy points, or a little bit more actually, like nearly 15 fantasy points since 2020. So yeah, Cook is a top 20 running back, borderline top 15 running back this week. And this next guy is actually in the top 5. And it's David Montgomery, who saw great usage week 1. And yeah, like I just said, it was not a mistake. He is a top 5 projected running back for me early on this week. Look, we got to talk about the role and break it down with more context, but just on the surface, it was great. 77% of the snaps, 64% of the rush attempts, and even 53% of the running back routes run. This is all awesome. And it led to 21 rush attempts and 4 red zone carries for Montgomery. Now, this is the expectation we had all off season. Montgomery, the bigger back at 220 plus pounds, is going to see the red zone work and early down work over Jahmyr Gibbs. And all of this led to a solid week 1 for Montgomery, about 13.5 fantasy points. Again, those 21 touches, but he wasn't efficient. He averaged like 3.5 yards per carry. That's definitely going to increase behind what was yet again week 1 a top 5 offensive line for the Lions. And Montgomery saw 0 targets. That's not going to continue. And if we look a little bit closer here, between Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, the running backs only saw 2 targets. They made up just 7% of the targets. Last year, the running backs were making up 20% plus of Jared Goff's targets. Expect this to go up. Now, we do have to discuss Jahmyr Gibbs. We've gone in depth on him in another video this week. He only saw 9 touches week 1, but he was great on these, averaging nearly 7 yards per touch. He looked really explosive, broke 6 tackles on just 7 carries. He looked great, and his own coach said he's going to see more usage moving forward. And here is that context. After the week 1 game on Thursday night versus the Chiefs, Dan Campbell said he'll begin to get more touches now, so that was just the beginning. So yeah, he's not only going to see 27% of the snaps and 9 touches as a top 12 pick, you could probably see closer to 15 plus touches. But this is fine because even if Montgomery sees only say 60% of the snaps, he's still going to be in line for 16 to 18 touches and earn even targets in the future weeks. And now heading into week 2, the Detroit Lions have the 4th highest team total, expected to score the 4th most points on the slate. This is crazy. This offense is now great. What a 360 flip from a couple of years ago. 26.5 point implied team total, 5.5 point favorites. Running backs in similar spots average 16 points to the usage that David Montgomery has been getting. He's a top 5 back this week. Now, this next guy isn't a top 5 back, but he is definitely quickly rising up the ranks. And it's the Miami Dolphins' #1 running back, Raheem Mostert. He has to climb up the rankings, and a lot of people miss this next fact. Devon Achane was a healthy scratch last week. I know he was dealing with a shoulder injury from the preseason, and people will say, oh, that's why he didn't play. No, you have to look closely. Because let me introduce you to the Dolphins injury report from last week. Look at this column right here for Devon Achane, his shoulder. Full participant, and then wasn't on the injury report. He was not listed questionable. He had no injury going into this game. He was left out because he was a healthy scratch inactive. They wanted Salvin Ahmed to play ahead of him. And based on the preseason usage, when Devon Achane was being like primarily used with the 3rd team offense and on special teams, this makes sense. So with Jeff Wilson on IR and no Devon Achane, this was the Raheem Mostert show. He saw 7 72% of the snaps, 53% of the rush attempts, and 70% of the routes run. Now, based on all this, he put up a solid 13 points. On his 12 touches, he had about 50 yards, so it was overall a nice game for him in what was basically a passing affair. They weren't running the ball all that much. And Mostert also earned, surprisingly, as a somewhat smaller back, 2 of the 3 red zone touches for the running backs in this game. And he quietly had the cheat code upside week 1. That is his red zone and passing game role for running backs. As of right now, he is the #1 running back in what was the #1 graded offense from week 1. And Jeff Wilson's going to miss at least 3 more games, and Devon Achane has big question marks around him. It doesn't look like he'll be involved. So that's why Mostert has to move up, and so does the rookie wide receiver Michael Wilson. He has to move up, and you have to know what he did week 1. He was his team's #1 wide receiver week 1. He was tied with Marquise Hollywood Brown, running a route on 91% of the Cardinals dropbacks, but more importantly, he operated as the X-possession receiver, the big #1 option in the progressions on the outside. Now, his production is surely not going to impress anybody. 3.9 fantasy points, 2 catches for 19 yards on 4 targets, but this is a middle round rookie in a really mid and bad offense. We have to discuss the usage, because Michael Wilson's average depth of target was 16.8 yards downfield. And if we just compare this to the other players on his team, Hollywood Brown was the next closest at almost half of that, 9 yards downfield. So Michael Wilson was the only guy in this offense seeing downfield deep targets, and that matters. Especially when you consider he's the biggest starting wide receiver on this team by over 30 pounds. 6'1", 216 pounds. Yeah, these starting wide receivers, the other guys are really small. Rondale Moore, Greg Dortch, Marquise Brown. So he's not only going to be the downfield primary option, but also the red zone primary option. Obviously, the quarterback situation isn't great, with Kyler Murray missing at least 3 more games and maybe even a ton more, or the entire season. Who knows after that? And Joshua Dobbs looking really bad, averaging 3.5 yards per drop back week 1. This is bad, but it's worst case scenario from week 1. I'm not telling you in your 8 or 10 man league to go ahead and stash him, but in a 12 team league or deeper, especially if you have deep bench spots, add it. And also consider grabbing the fantasy blueprint that I know thousands of you already have, but a lot of you don't. And here's why you want it. Hey, if you want to win your league, that's one good reason. It'll give you everything you need to do just that every day of the week, starting on Monday with the waiver wire tools you can see throughout here. The rest of season rankings is going to help you with trades. Obviously, the projections and rankings will help you for that week's matchup, and the game matchup notes, the game by game notes, are extremely important that come out on Fridays. It's literally every single meaningful player in every single game, like 300 plus players, with a detailed matchup analysis. Now, you can grab the blueprint by scanning the QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the description below. It'll take you to this page right here. You might have to scroll on mobile, but then look, simple as this. It's just $5 for the entire year if you go through this method right here. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll refund the $5. This is risk-free. You might as well go get it and join the thousands of other people who currently have it. So once again, scan the QR code on the screen to get access today, or click the link in the description below. Now, we got to talk yet again about Jake Ferguson, the Cowboys tight end, because he was quietly dominant week 1, but nobody noticed at all. And the reason why people didn't notice was because it was a 40-0 game. Pretty quickly, this became a blowout, and a lot of the starters got pulled. So Ferguson only ran 14 routes in this game, according to Fantasy Life, our official data partner. But look at this, 6 targets on 14 routes. That's a 43% target rate. For reference, Travis Kelce was like 3rd in the NFL amongst tight ends last year with a 28% rate. Clearly, that high of a number won't sustain, but it is the stickiest stat for wide receivers and tight ends, because it shows your ability to get open and your quarterback's interest in throwing to you. And we already have a large sample of Dak loving his tight end, because Dalton Schultz, a guy who was far less productive in college than Jake Ferguson, was a top 10 tight end the past 2 seasons in Dallas. So as your league mates simply just look at the box score of, 3 fantasy points, 2 catches for 11 yards. Yeah, well, look at the 6 or 7 targets, depending on your data source, who's going to be giving you that, if it is 6 or 7. Either way, look at those targets and how often he was targeted on his routes, almost 50% of the time. Once he plays a full game, he has legit 8 to 12 target upside is what that means. And to make things even better, Jake Ferguson slid right into Dalton Schultz red zone role. Schultz led the Cowboys in red zone targets last year, and Jake Ferguson 4 red zone targets week 1, tied for the NFL high. Again, he only ran 14 routes and played like 1/2. So in 12 team leagues, I want him to be at least on my bench as a backup tight end, because I want to see what happens here. There's some true, real serious upside. And now for this next player that's jumping up the ranks, we have to just start it by talking about Austin Eckler, who, look at this, he might actually miss a couple of weeks. We'll see what happens here, but Jeff Mueller on Twitter, a doctor, is saying, if true, if these right high ankle sprain is true based on the video that he's watching, there's an average running back miss time of 3 weeks. Now let's just say it's a week or 2. Either way, this next guy has to move up the ranks. And that would be Austin Eckler's backup running back, but more so from week 1, his running mate, his equal, if you will, in Joshua Kelly. Because according to the Fantasy Life data right here, Joshua Kelly played 45% of the snaps week 1. This was a split backfield, and look at this. The rush attempts, they each saw 47%. 16 rush attempts each is what that means. And on his 16 attempts, he was very good. He graded out as a top 10 running back week 1. He averaged 16 attempts for 91 yards. He averaged 5.7 yards per attempt, found the end zone, and also added a target. And Kelly even earned some valuable snaps. He saw 43% of the 2-minute drill work. He split the third down and long snaps with Eckler and had 5 red zone touches. And now this is exciting because he is a little bit of a bigger running back compared to Eckler. He's like 212 pounds coming out. Now he's apparently closer to 220 pounds, which gives him that red zone upside. He caught 23 passes in a limited role as a rookie, so he is a capable pass catcher, meaning he might have the fantasy cheat codes if he sees more usage. And now the reason why he's exciting is because week 1, the Chargers offense was totally different. Maybe that's a week 1 thing. Maybe the new offensive coordinator, Kellen Moore, is just pushing towards whatever the best matchup is, but check this out. In week 1, the Chargers ran the ball at the 9th highest rate, 47% of the time, but when the game was close, tied or in a 1-score game, they actually ran the ball at the highest rate in the NFL, over 52% of the time. And if you're curious to what Joshua Kelly has done when he's actually seen starter usage that he would see if you see no Austin Eckler out there, most of the time in the NFL, he's been a split backup, but in college at UCLA, his first year, he had over 1,500 total yards. His second year, he had over 1,100 total yards and 13 touchdowns. Takeaway is that based on the week 1 usage, Josh Kelly is a flex play moving forward, and if Eckler is out, he's a slam dunk top 10 running back. Now, Zay Jones is somebody who continues to steadily rise. I mean, he's been a staple of this skyrocketing up the rankings video over the past month that we've been doing that. Because in the preseason, we got a glimpse of what the offense might look like. It was Zay Jones, not Christian Kirk, staying on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, meaning he was playing ahead of Kirk. And for the people who say preseason doesn't matter, this is exactly why it does matter. Because that preseason usage stayed consistent in the regular season, where Zay Jones ran around on 94% of the dropbacks. He was a full-time player compared to Christian Kirk just 66% of the time, basically only a slot wide receiver. And this fueled Zay Jones towards a great day. 16.5 points, a very consistent and stable 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown on 7 targets. Look, Calvin Ridley got all the hype because he goes for over 20 points, over 100 yards, a touchdown. It's his big return. But Zay Jones was quietly a strong number 2 option in this game. And if we look at some of the usage right here, it's impressive. The first row is the Calvin Ridley stats. The second row is the Zay Jones stats. Zay Jones had a higher average depth of target. He had pretty significant air yards, 35%. He split the end zone targets, split the 3rd and 4th down targets where the wide receiver is the priority, and he had more play action targets, which play action passes lead to higher efficiency. So he was very, very good. Ridley is still the wide receiver 1, but Zay Jones was great in this game. And not only did he easily beat out Christian Kirk, but he beat out Evan Ingram too, the tight end in the middle of the field, who did run 31 routes, but only earned 5 targets. So we now have a 20-game sample, all of last year and the final couple of games with the Raiders the season before that, of Zay Jones being a top 25 wide receiver, but still nobody is treating him like that. He should not be on your waiver wires. He should be in your fantasy lineups. Now, this next guy probably shouldn't be in your fantasy lineups yet, but yet again, another week, this past week in week 1 was good news for him. And it's the running back version of Zay Jones and Jaylen Warren, who continues to be in the skyrocketing up the ranks video, because look, the drumbeat continues for him after week 1. Warren played 40% of the Steelers running back snaps. That is tied for the most snaps that he's seen in a game where Najee Harris was healthy. But what's even more intriguing is the touch split from this game. Because if you add up the running back rush attempts and targets, Najee Harris had 8 in this game and Jaylen Warren had 9 in this game, so it was really close to a split, and Warren had 6 targets. Now, the Steelers did play from behind like the entire game, so it did propel a little bit more targets than like an average game pace. But there was still some good situational football here from Warren. This top number is Najee Harris, the bottom is Jaylen Warren. Warren actually saw more than double the long down and distance, so like the 3rd and long snaps, but Najee is still the true running back 1. He started this game, he saw more rush attempts, 67%, and he played 83% of the 2-minute offense, which is important to call out. But we're not trying to say Jaylen Warren is the running back 1 in Pittsburgh. We're just trying to say that every week he's seeing more and more volume and more encouraging signs. Now, week 1, none of the Steelers' skill position players did anything. Najee Harris, 8 total touches for 33 yards, and this includes a 24-yard play that kind of skews up his efficiency, but also Jaylen Warren did nothing on his touches. He had like 18 total yards. But the difference was based on the opportunities that they saw if they were in a neutral situation with a neutral offensive line. Jaylen Warren, based on his touches, would have seen the 34th overall fantasy points on the week. Still bad, but it was a tough matchup, and Najee Harris 79th on this list. Now, I mentioned that tough matchup. It was as hard as it gets. The 49ers defense is elite in all levels of the field, and they were number 1 after week 1 overall in total defense. So yeah, it's basically literally going to get easier from here on out. They have a tough matchup week 2 against the Browns, who are a top 10 defense, against the Bengals in a bad weather game week 1, but after that, things start to open up. So continue to monitor Jaylen Warren. Hopefully you have him on your bench by now. Pick him up if for some reason he's available, and get this next guy and potentially start him. It's the Packers tight end Luke Musgrave, who week 1, look, he has to move up the rankings after what we saw. He went out there and ran her out on 80% of the Packers passing plays, which for tight ends who do this, they see 80% or more of the routes run for their offense. They average a top 12 fantasy finish, and that's if you're just an average tight end. We know Luke Musgrave is a top 3% athlete of all time according to the NFL Combine database. And Musgrave's only competition is a 3rd-round rookie in Tucker Kraft, who only ran 27% of the routes, had no targets, played only a handful of snaps. Like Josiah Deguara had 13% of the routes, still nothing, but he's actually being used as like a fullback and a blocker mostly. So you got a good week out of Luke Musgrave. He was second on the week in tight end yards. Second on the week, 3 catches on 4 targets. That's a good showing for any rookie tight end in their debut for sure, but it should have been a lot better. There's a video out there, you can see it if you want to, that basically he got overthrown on what would have been a walk-in touchdown. And the other one, his big reception on a fumbled snap that was thrown off the back foot, a lovely pass by Jordan Love. He basically just stumbles on after he catches it, Luke Musgrave. He's too big for his body. That would have been another 20 yards and a touchdown, and there's no way you would have been able to add him or even had any chance at getting him on your team. Now, my concern for Musgrave is what we brought up earlier with Jaden Reed, how the Packers really don't want to pass all that much. But for a tight end, it's not as important because we're really just hoping for a couple of catches in like a touchdown for you to be a top 5 tight end on the week. Now, you could put all the information we just discussed here to use right now on Underdog, where they have weekly contests. You can see right here, weekly contests with 35 grand in prizes. Check out this one, the Battle Royale, the one I like the most, $500,000 in prizes. These are literally in-season drafts that you get to do. Yes, in-season drafts. The best part of fantasy is drafting. You could do this weekly on Underdog right now. And their #1 contest is their Battle Royale. There's $50,000 to first place, just $10 to enter. You get to draft a team, have some fun, and hell, maybe make a year's salary, if not more, in 1 week of playing fantasy. Now, if you want to get a free deposit match up to $100, meaning if you put in up to 100, maybe 20, you get 20 back, up to 100, you get 100 right back, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. So these players are skyrocketing up the rankings, but there's guys who are falling down the rankings and you want to trade them away. You can see who these players are in this beautiful video right over here. And if you enjoyed this content, make sure you hit the subscribe button. It truly helps me as we push towards 100,000 subscribers, but it'll allow you to see my future content so you know what you can do. Schmack around your buddies.